Hi everyone, and welcome to the Tech Seeking Human podcast. And in our very first episode, we're talking to global tech ethnographer Tricia Wang. Yeah, I said that correctly. Global tech ethnographer. What on earth is that? Basically, it's the study of how humans interact with technology and data, which means she can tell us whether we're getting it right or we've been getting it wrong. Listen to the tips and tricks from a global expert. Why big data might just be a lie. How to find meaning in the information that you're collecting. Spend less time on reporting and understand how cool the Department of the Unknown is. Ladies and gentlemen, Tricia Wang, welcome to the Tech Seeking Human podcast, brought to you by Dynatrace. Tricia, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks.
How does a data ethnographer, if that's what you call your profession, well, I want to go into that, but I see boxes in the background and they're color-coded.
This is the physical manifestation of my database for moving. So you're looking at my Airtable in real time, and I've color-coded every room and content, and it's all in my database, but I can also be here. I'm one step away from like QR coding it, but that was too much.
Oh my gosh, that's a little too far. Do you freak out? What are they called? Removalists in America or movers? What do you call them?
Yeah, movers.
Movers. Do you freak them out because of your database and whatnot?
No, I think they're relieved because it's like I'm doing my job to make sure my items are tracked, so I won't be blaming them if things get lost, or I will find out right away if they get lost.
Ethnographer is a ginormous word. Is this what you explain to people at dinner parties?
Ethnographer, 4 syllables, and it is the worst word to say at dinner parties. But the reason, no one knows what it is, but the reason why I say it is because I didn't have any other job title. I was I am not just purely a data scientist. I'm not just a strategist. I'm not just a marketer. I'm not just a designer, which all those things on its own are amazing, but it's I'm a little bit of everything. And so I was well, I'll just make up a job title and I'll find out very quickly if people are listening or not, because when I say it that I'm a tech ethnographer or data ethnographer, if you say, oh great, that means you're clearly not listening, because no one knows what the hell that is.
Yeah, that's a good
and then if you're curious and you're actually listening, you want to know, you'll ask why, and then we can get into a real conversation, which is cool. And I would say most half and half, you never know, but it's a great sorting mechanism, and that's totally okay too. No judgment, because sometimes you don't want to talk about work, and it's just a nervous twitch, especially in America, to be what do you do? And that's the worst question I think to ask someone. When you meet someone, it's then you're going to tie your identity to my work, and I have to pick the right thing to introduce myself. But it's someone like me, where there's a lot of people like me where you just have a million different job identities. I can decide what to say in one context, but it's just please don't ask me what I do. But if I'll tell you, it's a tech ethnographer, and ethnography means the study of people. It's a scientific study of people, observing people, and being a data or tech ethnographer means I love how people and organizations make decisions with data and use technology. So it's essentially, I love watching people, and I found a way to make a profession out of it. And that's what you learn as an anthropologist or sociologist, is how to be an ethnographer. It's one of the many qualitative skills that you learn.
You're scaring me now, because I want to come back to more of the ethnography, but I think now that you're analyzing people, all of a sudden I got this oh my gosh, I'm doing.
We're always watching.
Yeah.
Always. Every little finger tick that you do, I'm seeing.
You are real, right? You're not one of these deep fake AI bots.
I could be.
We had a couple of fast 4 questions to warm you up and get you ready, and we didn't tell you what they were going to be. Which
I know. I'm dreading this part. I'm great, go, start it.
Let's do this.
Let's go. So 3 dinner party guests, dead or alive?
Dead or alive. I would want to have Thich Nhat Hanh in a room. He's one of my favorite Buddhist writers. Mm-hmm. And he talks about how, why we have suffering, because we just center ourselves in everything. I would really, really want to have Barbara Smith, who's alive. She created the term Black feminism, and she was the first to give people a language for understanding intersectionality, and that you can't, not to be a single issue organizer, that it's not just about race, it's about race and economic, and gender when we're fighting for equality. And I think, the third person I would invite to dinner would be Septima Clark, who was the invisible person behind the civil rights organizing that Martin Luther King did. She set up literacy programs and actually taught people how to read so that they could vote And so many people celebrate someone like Martin Luther King, which he's amazing, but there's civil rights movement was built on the amazing organizing work of many women, in particular Black women.
Wow, that's absolutely fascinating. I
Very
love those
impressive
guests.
list. Yes. And so, biggest inspiration then?
I think, this is like, I'm thinking of Oprah Winfrey because I literally just watched her interview with Meghan Markle. I don't know if anyone else has seen that, but Oprah Winfrey's life story is incredible. She went from being someone who was sexually abused and, being like closed, like in a time where no one would hire Black women. She just kept pushing open doors, and she is someone who brings everyone together, is very inclusive. And I think she's also an amazing interviewer, because I think interviewing like what you all are doing, it requires a lot of skills, and that you have to know the person, you have to ask questions, but also not center yourself, but keep it going. Like, I think she's incredible at pulling out the human stories in people. Yeah. So I'm going to say her because I literally just watched a Meghan Markle interview.
I haven't. Yeah, I know. I know, another shock. It has been all over the news here, but I don't know. I just haven't had the. I don't know. I haven't. I'm sorry. I know this is a shock.
I'm not into all that history, but I was like, I'm into history where if you're telling me somebody controls all the land in England and no one owns things, and you have like that much money and resources, like I'm interested in institutions and how they built up all that power, the firm. So that's cool.
Really, we should be watching it because
they're still sovereign. Yeah, we are part of it. And the royal family, or whatever that TV show that was on Netflix, that was like the number one show,
Crown.
The Crown.
Yeah.
And I was really addicted to it. Like,
if you've watched that, you have to watch a Meghan Markle interview.
I know.
All right. Next one is, what is your advice to your 16-year-old self? It's a bit intense.
Oh, this is a really good one. My advice to my 16-year-old self is, I think, would have been, I just wish someone had told me that you really should invest in meditating. Like, it's so not cool, but it is. Like, if I had learned the skills of meditating and like truly harnessing your energy, and not just meditating, like sitting there meditating, but like really understanding why and how that's connected to your energy, and learning how to like self-regulate better and not freak out.
Yeah.
I think I would have been better in life, like just in personal relationships, everything, like just learning how to value that much earlier on.
That's true. I think they do that a lot more. My kids are getting taught about self-regulation and mindfulness, and we never had that.
And I have
that's incredible.
Yeah.
My kids use the Headspace app all the time. So they really are active kids, and they lay down, and I can hear, I go, do you want me to put Headspace on for you? And they're like, yeah, yes, please, Dad. And I'll put it on, and I can hear them breathing. And so,
that's good.
Yeah.
How old are your kids?
8 and 10.
Claire?
8 and 6.
Okay. Oh, very similar. That's incredible. You all are amazing parents.
Yeah. Well,
I wish
this morning getting out the door.
Maybe the fact that they need Headspace is probably where the bad parenting comes from. But no.
Oh, that's incredible. And since I can break the rule, I wish that someone explained compound interest to me at a very young age also. And I wish I made decisions about compound interest and just like all those things that are like not so sexy that you've put in the adult box. It's always like usually not too late, but like it would have been great to know about compound interest. That's right. And, learning how to manage your breath and breathe from the earth. Yeah. Like would have been great tools.
Yes. A last one. Finish this sentence. AI will
fold my clothes.
Oh, yeah. I like it. That's a creative one.
Practical. The practical side comes out in the boxes and domestic. I like it.
So switch gears now that we've got to know you a little bit, which I think is fantastic. You talk a lot about big data. You talk about enterprises, the importance of human and insights coming into the analysis of data. You also have talked about what's wrong with the current approach. I think at one point in your TED Talk, you said over 70% or 73% of big data projects are unprofitable. What's wrong with our approach?
So the way we approach data inside the enterprise, we approach it as if we're still a very small company, because data science wasn't born inside enterprise. Enterprises were actually some of the last companies to hire data scientists. And what they did was they just thought, literally, if you could hire a data scientist, plop them in the corner, give them data, tell them to collect some stuff, they could churn out like revenue for the company. And more or less, that is what companies have done. I would say that in the first phase of big data, there was a really big obsession around tools. It was very much like, can we, how big of a data lake can you get? How's your warehouse? Thinking about security, which are all totally important things. We have to build these tools to be able to analyze and collect large amounts of data. Are you on-prem, off-prem? How much of it is in the cloud? All very important questions, right? But that is very different from then the next phase that I've seen, which is very much about just being able to say that like that's really just being data driven. The second phase of big data is about looking for patterns in the data. So that's like data 2.0. And so the first phase of data was data 1.0, just collecting the data, like really obsession around the tools and the talent for that. But we've been told this lie, and that I think that's been perpetuated by thinkers of artificial like neural networks, like Gregory Hinton, who created Google Brain, is this professor who's incredible. But what he did was he said, look, if you just throw enough data at the machine will be able to tell you the patterns, and that is the magic. And that's why you like see all that from Google Deep Brain, all those weird things where you see like shows recursive levels of dogs, because if you train the machine just on data about dogs, all it can see when you give it new images are other dogs, right? Because the machine will see what you want it to see. And for some reason, we think that's enough. There is this lie inside organizations. If we have just enough data, or if we have unlimited amount, like the more data we have, the better decisions we will make, because then we'll have enough patterns coming out of the data and we'll know what to do. And that all sounds very logical, but what I'm trying to help enterprises understand is that that's not how you make decisions with data. Because if you're in data 1.0 where you just collect data, you're not understanding the patterns. But even if you're in data 2.0, you're actually looking for the patterns, your machine is looking for the patterns. That's also not because you're just doing data-driven work. And data-driven decision-making is this obsession with companies. What I'm trying to move companies to is data 3.0, which is looking for meaning in the data. Because that's how you make decisions, is you have to be able to say, out of these patterns, I see that like there are 10 red spots. Well, why did these red spots occur? And the minute when you start asking why, you eventually, especially in a customer-driven facing company where there's customers involved, you eventually have to say, well, maybe it's because this became red because people woke up early this time, or this customer did da. You start to find out why, and then you can get into the meaning of the data of like, well, it's not just that like 10 red spots showed up here at this time, which is a pattern. Is to say, what is the meaning? What is the why in that happened? And so that's what I want to move companies to. And I think that enterprises have to do this, because the way I see enterprises working is like they're hiring a data scientist, throw them in the corner. They're like, go look for the patterns and then tell us what you find. When the real work is about communication in the data. When you're looking for meaning, you have to look for insights. And that's a whole different way of working. That means you don't just hire data scientists. Actually, the ratio of data scientists to what I call data translators or product managers or thick data people to data, to just researchers, qualitative people, it should be way less. And we have way too many data scientists, not enough data translators. Not enough qualitative work happening, which is you need to find out the meaning. That quantitative data is not enough. So the premise is that, yes, if you have more data, you could get to better decisions, but what that data needs to lead to is better insights. And the insights is what takes you to decisions. The insights is what holds the meaning.
That brings back to the idea of the perspective shift and talking to these companies about, listening to understand and having the different perspective. Do you have examples of where that's happened well?
So I think there's a lot of, examples of good and bad. We'll start with the great examples. I think companies, there's a really good comparison of my business partner, Matt LeMay, wrote a really good article about that. We'll post, I can send you the link about if either of you play guitars, I don't know, but he's a big guitar player. Oh, great. Okay. So you're going to love this article because he talks, in this article, he talks about why Gibson became bankrupt, right? And his whole thing is like, why did Fender win and Gibson go bankrupt? And he just ascribes it to that Fender in the end was actually customer centric, and that they actually listened to their customers. And what Fender found out was that there was an evolution in the people who were learning how to play guitars, that they were women, and they started to shift all their marketing and shift the kinds of products that they were making. And they actually did better targeting, they did better storytelling, but they actually created more nuance in the way they talked about their product and sold their product, whereas Gibson just never changed, you know. But it was all this use of it was just obsessed about, they were just dependent on their quantitative data. And whereas Fender was like, you know what, if we're actually going to reach new customers, maybe the quantitative data is not going to tell us what to do. We need to go out and do ethnographic interviews. We need to go to talk to people. We need to go to forums and understand how people are talking, where people are asking advice, who are these people, and why, and what's a changing profile. So that's like an example where you can see it's like, here's in the same industry, one company doing really well.
Can I jump on that?
Yeah,
because I'm a massive guitar fan, and I'm trying to process it, because I did see, and I didn't know the background to this, but I have seen Fender doing, embracing technology and teaching people. They have their own app where you can learn to play the guitar. And you're right, as soon as you said that, it's a female sitting there playing the guitar. So I was like, well, that's not a fluke that happened. And with Gibson, to your point, so if I play it back really, really simply in my small little brain, I go, Gibson goes, wow, we're not selling as many guitars as we used to sell. Maybe we're not selling the right type of guitar. Maybe the pricing isn't right. And they stick to their same traditional methods of how they're doing their guitars. And what you're saying is Fender has gone out and asked the public and said, what else could we do? What's the trends? What's happening? Who could our new buyers be? Who are our existing buyers? And then discovering new opportunities and new markets. Is that basically, have I summarized it?
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. And you know what Gibson did was they invested like a shitload of money in innovation, because they were like, oh, so we're losing money. And like, I think it's like he went on, the CEO of Gibson went on, did an interview, and he was like, we want to become like the Nike of music lifestyle. And it was just like totally disconnected to what customers really wanted. Was like, these are new customers. They don't want to become the Nike of music life. They just want to learn how to play the guitar. So just guide them through. Like, these are new guitar players. These are not like rock stars or want to be rock stars. So I think that's why, like, yeah, you actually now, I love that you noticed a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, they're big on their new technology. I've seen it. It's great. I mean, Gibson do make good guitars, just as a completely side note. So if they have gone bankrupt and I can pick up cheap guitars, please do let me know where to get one from the US. Send one out, because they do have a good sound. But anyway, they've completely missed the mark when it comes to their audience and their opportunity too.
Totally. And like, you can tell in the quote from the CEO is that his conception of the customer is like this purist, right? That's what Matt talks about. It's like this purist guitar player who wants to become a rock star. And that was not it totally failed to understand their customers. And if someone just said, hey, why don't you go do some research on our customers or potential customers? What's changed in the guitar landscape? What's changed in expectations around music and how people learn about instruments? I think they might be around still.
Is that a cultural change that made them different? Because you're just staring at data all the time as one company and you're going, oh, I don't know, drop the price or whatever. And the other company's going, what else could we... You said, ask why. And that's one of the cultural principles of Dynatrace. Their engineering team is like, ask 5 times why. So question.
Wow.
Question. Get to the lowest possible common denominator of what the possibilities could be. Is that a cultural thing within Fender or within the companies that you work with that are getting it right? That it's a cultural thing to question the information that they're given in order to process it and going, it could be this, it could be that, it could be that. Let's go test it. Let's go ask.
I absolutely agree that it's cultural, that the leadership has to first exemplify it, right? But also, to make culture real, it has to be in practice. And that's why you have to have companies like that's what you said, where it's like, you could just name, like, ask why 5 times. Like, I love that. It's like, everyone knows that is the thing you must do. And it's like, tactical changes are the practices of what that make culture real. So it's not just something that lives abstractly, Yep. And this is like what we do at our company, Set and Compass, is like, we go in and we teach organizations like, yes, like culturally you want to be close to your customers, but we're going to make it real for you. And by changing your actual practices of how you work together and how you communicate together. And I think that's the nature of the beast of working with data inside an enterprise, is that you can't afford to work alone, because data scientists often come from agencies or single players. They come from academia, where they're used to working alone with their data set. When you're in an enterprise, not a small company, when you're in an enterprise, you actually have to collaborate and communicate with data in ways that you don't have to in a non-enterprise setting, in an SME or more in a agency setting. And so you have to pick up all these skills that data scientists don't have. And that's why being data-driven is not enough. You have to be insight-driven, because you have to be talking to the people who are closest to the customer. So the kind of data scientists or data translators that the profiles we're advising our clients to hire are people who work well with, let's say, sales teams, marketing teams, with customer service people who aren't scared to be let me go down to the call center and look at their logs, and then go talk to the people about why their database of logs look like this. Why were there 30% more calls at this hour, or the nature of the calls? Why were they more about problem solving, server B, right? You got to talk to the people who are coaching your customers through, and on the receiving end of being the most customer facing. You will learn so much from them. And so we're always in an organization, it's very hierarchical, and we're always you got to even it out a little bit and give more power to the people who are closest, and by talking to them, elevating and lifting up their knowledge. And then the people on top have to learn how to come down a bit and talk to these people and learn from them, who are most customer facing, who are not being paid the most, because these people are paid the most.
Yeah, and let them do it, because it's the people often that are analyzing the data that have a voice and have an opinion. But I've seen it in organizations where they get squashed because they're I just need an answer for the board. I don't have time for you to give me the possibilities. I need you just to give me what your best assumption is. But it's these people that are if it's a different mindset, it's a different cultural thing, where it's well, it could be that. Go take your time to figure out what it possibly could be. Are you seeing that? Because it's in my head, I go marketing operations people, amazing in Excel, amazing data people, very interesting when you open them up, but they're potentially introverted and they're not given a voice. Let them have a voice, let them have an opinion, because they're closest to the data, but also that you're saying get close, not just to the data, but get close to the customer and get close to the outcome, right?
Yeah. And get close to the people who are close to the customer, because they get close to the most customer facing people in your org. A lot of organizations are looking for quick fixes. They want, like you said, a quick answer. And what we find is that all of these data, for some reason we have more dashboards, but we don't have less PowerPoints. I ask every C-suite leader this, do you actually have less PowerPoints in right now than you did before? Now that we have more dashboards for you to look at? And no, it's dashboards are just being people are just screenshotting or exporting their dashboards to put into more PowerPoints, and then just shit gets piled up where someone's give me a PowerPoint, and then the junior person makes it, sends it back, and oh no, we need this, and it gets so politicized, and then everyone is so obsessed with making PowerPoints as opposed to actually learning how to communicate with data about people. And this is why at Sudden Compass, we have a practice, we have a tool, and we open source most of our tools eventually after we use it with our clients, because we really believe that you shouldn't pay us for the tools, you should pay us for our time and our expertise and our guidance. So we have a tool that's open, it's on the website, it's called 1hour1page.com. My business partner Matt LeMay made it. And all it is saying is that everyone we work with, that anyone in the world can take this pledge, which is I promise to not work for more than 1 hour or one page before I share something. This means you can't work on a deck that is going to be more than 1 hour a page. You can't work on your universal data model for more than an hour, right? Or more than a page of a Excel spreadsheet. You can't work on writing your algorithm or figuring out your weights. You can't work on any of this stuff for more than an hour or a page, because this forces collaboration. So if I tell you be collaborative, you're going to be great, thanks, bye.
Yeah.
I'm collaborative, great. Or if I tell you be more communicative, you're I'm trying. What do you want me to do differently? But if I just tell you tactically, can you agree to this manifesto, which is that if we're going to work together, you don't do more than 1 hour or one page of work, and that before sharing something, people are oh yeah, I can do that. And we don't have to mention the words collaboration, be more communicative, don't center yourself, do more teamwork, because everyone's thanks, I got it. I do all that stuff. But it's like, yeah, I can do like
It's
1
a
hour, one page,
tactic.
and then I'll definitely spit it back to you. And then no disclaimers are given, like, oh, really, I only spent a week on this, so let me know what you think. And when you really don't want to know, where you really don't want to know what people think, because you are so precious about this thing, this data model you've spent building up, may not make sense, but you'll find out quickly if it's just 1 hour, one page.
Have you seen examples of companies that have made the switch? Because isn't it like, or even just really good examples?
Yeah.
Like I heard, I don't know how true this is, but I heard Jeff Bezos wouldn't allow executives to come to the executive meeting with PowerPoint presentations. They had to, it's basically tell me stories. Tell me you know what you're talking about and just tell me the story of what's going on. Do you have any anecdotes or stories of companies that have transitioned and the difference that it's made? Because there might be people listening now going, oh my God, that's me. We spend 30 hours a week pulling together a PowerPoint presentation for which the executive team spend all of about 6 minutes. They question like one data point. I've wasted 100 hours. Have you seen people make a transition and the difference it's made?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I could name our clients, who we do coach them in this transition and this transformation. But I think more powerful is people who write to us. If you go to the 1 hour, one page, you'll see the people who've signed the manifesto, but also there's so many people who just haven't signed it, but are doing the work of 1 hour, one page. And when we hear from them, and we ask for people to share your templates of like anything that is useful to you, we have a communication manual on the site that, we've shared, and other people shared their templates of like, they have seen massive changes in their company just by in their own team or their own department, just by saying, hey, all, we're going to do 1 hour, one page pledge. I've seen it on projects where just even me being brought onto a project, I say, let's all sign this manifesto. It's really incredible. So I would say that the change is real and it happens quickly. And that's why you don't even need to hire us to tell you do this. That's why we're like, it's on the website, it's online, just go to it, sign it, and do it. Start now.
So I was going to touch on the pandemic because I think people are ready for change because we just, as a society, went through in our lifetime, the biggest, still going through one of the biggest changes. So I think now is a good time to make a change and go, you know what? The old normal was not cool. The new normal, forget it. Let's get rid of all the crap we used to do and let's do something completely different because we've all had to go through that change. Is that what you're seeing in the pandemic? Are you seeing any of that at the moment or getting an essence of like, yep, I'm ready, let's do something different?
Absolutely. I mean, the way I talk about this is where my tech ethnographer hat comes on, is that my meta-analysis of what's happening is that we are living in a moment of spatial collapse. And what I mean by that is that our mental models, we may not talk about it consciously, but we have a mental model for how we organize ourselves around space. So for centuries, the way we've organized around space is that first space is home, and you do your home stuff at home. Like you cut your nails, you take your shower at home, right? And then there's second space, that's work. You leave your home, you put on work clothes. You don't just go in a bathrobe. Like you put on work clothes and you go to work and you do work stuff there. You don't Netflix when you're at work, you do that at home. And then there's stuff that happens outside of work and home, and that's third space. And that's the public, that's social space. That's where you can be anonymous. It's where you can go to a bar, you can go to a dance club, you can be at a park or a library. All that stuff where you're outside of your home's identity and your work identity, right? And for centuries, all those spaces were very, very stable. This actually came out of the Industrial Revolution. That's the creation of first, second, third space. It came out of the UK, home of Industrial Revolution, where people were forced off of their lands through enclosure. They moved into factories, and all of a sudden factory became this thing outside of home, outside of their own piece of land. And you had a whole an opening of new types of businesses that came out of third space to serve this whole new industrial revolution life. You had bars, clubs, like all of these things came out of third spaces, out of the industrial revolution. So that stuff, what we've been doing over the last couple of centuries, is completely done now. Right now, where I'm standing, first space is home, second space is work, third space is also my social life. It is completely these three spaces that were neatly, separate, have collapsed onto each other and jumbled and mumbled. And that means one of the things I'm looking at is what does this mean for how we work with digital interfaces? What does this mean for our expectations around our digital interactions with our data? Now that we're spending more time in 2D space, what are our expectations for all this data that's been captured about us and being used? And I'm going to stop there. But the point is, yes, I think we're in the middle of a historical change. It's called a spatial collapse. We haven't seen one for couple centuries. We're in one now. We're still in it, and everything is changing.
You've come up with ethnographer. You've come up with thick data, which I haven't covered.
Yeah.
This is a revolution. This is like is it spatial collapse, or are you going to come up with a name and we're going to run with it? Because this is
That's it. That's the name, spatial collapse.
Spatial collapse. Is that
there have been past spatial collapses, and now we're just living in a spatial collapse. And it's not good or bad. It's always like, there's always shitty things that come out of spatial collapse. There's also like really amazing things. Like in a spatial collapse for Industrial Revolution, like there was kidnapping of slaves, that was a spatial collapse to feed the Industrial Revolution, right? There was also through that the invention of insurance on a life for the insurance of 18 months, but that's where life insurance comes from, so it's none of these things can be just attributed to like binary good or bad. Yep. But out of that also came women's rights, and also like out of that came democracy, nation states. So the point is that right now we have to, it's not even like what is going to stick. It's more like what is the paradigm shift? And I'm really looking at the paradigm shifts around expectations around data, how companies are responding to that. So yeah, I think this is like, it's massive. Like I get overwhelmed at night thinking about this.
We can write the new rules of the spatial collapse. The new rule of the spatial collapse is you're allowed to drink champagne at breakfast whilst working and Netflix with friends. That's the third. That's how the
and you're allowed to do Zoom calls without pants on because no one gives a shit.
Yeah. These are the new rules.
Definitely got pants.
Of the spatial collapse.
Love it.
Pants are on.
Check.
Department of Unknown.
Department of the Unknown.
Oh, we should talk about that.
That is mysterious.
I know. It sounds really mysterious. Tell us.
Go on, Claire.
You go.
I go. Department of the Unknown. What is this?
Claire, I love it. You're like the one who like brings up these little words and you're like, now you go figure it out.
Yeah, she's a smart one. She's like...
I see who's guiding it.
Yeah.
I see who's in control.
Yeah, I'm just a talking head.
Yeah.
She's probing me, going like, talk about this now.
Yeah.
You've got the easiest job, Claire, the funnest one. So the Department of Unknown is a talk that I gave about how I think every company needs to have a Department of the Unknown. And I don't literally mean like have a P&L and, in your organization, literally have a Department of Unknown, but you should know who is accountable for telling you the unknown, what you don't know. And the reason why this is important is because in an enterprise, in particular in enterprises, but I would think in like SMEs also, is that like everything you do inside a company is built up to help you see the world from your perspective so that you can persevere and so that you can succeed. It is to serve either your shareholders. It is to serve your employees. You're here to serve your existing customers, but it's from your perspective of what you think is best. And you're so busy running the company and keeping it going that it becomes harder and harder to actually find out what you don't know. And what you don't know could disrupt you. It could be your next 10 years of growth, or it could be your death. And so if you want it to be your growth, you need to have people on top of that. And you need it to be someone's job, a team's job to tell you that. And that team needs to be very integrated also with existing businesses. There's a lot of times people thought, well, I can just make an innovation function and keep it far away, which I get the reason why it needs to be protected and far away. But oftentimes, if there's not enough close of a link to be close to the existing customers and new customers, then all that skunk work that is done is never brought into the existing organization. It becomes this like fight over, are we cannibalizing our existing business? And that's why it's important to have always the existing organization must be invested in the Department of the Unknown so that you can meaningfully and efficiently negotiate that hard, tricky thing of, do we cannibalize, or at what point does the new product interfere with our existing product, and how do you make that transition meaningfully? There has to be investment from the existing leadership.
That sort of makes me think of the Tesco story. What was it? That they would put a personalized pricing point on their products. What were they trying to do?
Manipulate and get more market share from people that have more money.
But to me, it's like it's not practical at all.
To simplify, maybe, and Tricia, you tell us how this works, but in my head, this is how I was processing it. I have a little bit more money they profile me as more money, therefore I get charged more for bananas than someone who doesn't have as much money, which doesn't seem fair. And eventually, if people find out about it, they're going to get angry about it.
Yeah.
Is that an example of like how to analyze data and not put common sense on top of it?
Yeah, it's an example of when a bunch of data scientists were in a room and they said, we have an idea because we've been tasked with increasing the ROI of Tesco, which makes sense, right? It was their job. And they came up with an idea that I think totally makes sense in their own world, which is that if we have so much data now for a loyalty card, if we just make sure that we can untie, we can actually offer personalized pricing because we have enough demographic information about each customer. So we can offer personalized pricing, because customers are accustomed to it with Uber, with Lyft, with Amazon, that pricing changes every day. But they're like, we'll just personalize it and make it feel personal because that's what you can do. But just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. And they just never bothered asking, how would customers feel about this? And it's not like they didn't have the ethnographers and the market researchers there, or even just talk to the salespeople or cashiers. It's just that the data scientists were siloed off in another office, in another floor. And the leadership thought if we have enough data, we're going to make better decisions now. They never questioned to think, how do we communicate about this internally and with others? How do we make sure that we collaborate in a way where we are taking advantage of the trust and not ruining the trust, Because data, I say always, is the currency for trust right now. When we talk about trust, it's like so abstract, but it's like we've gotten to the point where what you do with customers' data is you're setting the standards for trust. And so that is a currency. If you screw up on trust, you just completely went into debt. If you're with your data, if you screw up on data, you screw up on trust.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's come out of the spatial collapse is that because we're spending our time like this, more time in 2D space, I think people have develop much greater awareness for what is personal data, what is theirs, and what companies are doing with their personal data. That maybe this thing we've been promised, which is that freemium has been an okay business model, like Facebook, like Robinhood. Maybe it's not so free. Maybe it's going to be used against us, and that's why I think the Robinhood GME situation, it was such a precedence, because here's this like free investing platform, but what they're really doing is selling your data to hedge funds so that and it's like, well, how do we talk about that in terms of unequal with information arbitrage? And so I think everyone is just becoming more aware of what is personal data, and we're having more discussions and more nuance about it. So what companies could do with people before is changing. People's expectations are changing. Some are becoming more suspicious, and some are just downright like, get me out of here. And that's the danger, if people won't even, like, people just don't trust your app to use it or trust your platform.
Yeah. So one of the things you're saying, if I summarize, and then I want to touch on one thing about this data point that you just made, get close to the customer and ask the questions and of people who aren't your customers yet to really understand what's going on. If I could really summarize it and go, data is one thing and you need it, but you've got to go and ask questions of people, get their stories, understand why. Is that basically pretty simple advice?
I would say big data is one thing, quantitative data, numbers, data that shows up in a database. But in order to make numbers show up in a spreadsheet or in database, I don't care how big your database is, it's the same thing. It's just a fancy spreadsheet. You have to normalize, you have to standardize, and you have to cluster. You have to do all those things to clean the data to show up in a spreadsheet or a large warehouse so that you can use it in that lake, right? That's quantitative data. There's a whole other set of data that I call thick data, which is just qualitative data. It's data that comes in the form of stories. It's tears, it's smiles, it's those things that don't fit in a spreadsheet. That's just as much, that's data too. That is also data. It's just when we say data, most people automatically think only quantitative data. And I'm saying it is quantitative, it is big data, it is qualitative, it is thick data. It is that ethnographic material, the stories that you would gather. Inside most organizations, they only want the big data and they devalue the qualitative, the thick data. Worse off, they don't even integrate it. So that's what we're telling companies that they have to do, is you have to value both and then you have to integrate it. And that means new skills around research, around collaboration, and around communication. And to summarize also the other point you're saying is that they had a good business question, Tesco. Most companies know the business question that keeps them up at night, which is like, how do we get more customers? How do we make more money? Yeah. More or less, like every business question comes down to that. their fault was they didn't do what a tool that we also created that is now open source. It's on the Google design site. It's free. Anyone can download it. But it's turning your business question into a human question so that you don't abandon the business question, because you do need to make money, but the human question is just as important. So if the business question was like, how do we make more money off of loyalty cards? That's a business question. A human question could have been like, what are people's relationships with grocery stores? How do people think about loyalty cards to begin with? How do people shop? How do people choose who to trust? Those are all human questions, right? And we're saying those two things need to be imbalanced and identified and articulated so that you can negotiate them together as an integrated data team, so you can come up with the best insight and a set of recommendations for business decision makers to take. None of that happened at Tesco. At most companies, they are winging it. I don't see that always happening. Some companies are doing it great. And I think that the companies that continue doing this more will be the ones who will succeed. And people are demanding it. I think people have been able to get away, companies have been able to get away with it because honestly, people's expectations and understanding of data has not been very nuanced. But I think that's changing as companies are diversifying their customers and people are getting smarter. I think customers do want to know, and they're going to start getting more vocal.
So these AIs, the evolution of AI, artificial intelligence, is coming for that quantitative data, which is giving the humans more time to spend on the thick data. Is that a good assumption of what is happening or the opportunity that could present to us as a result of an AI?
I think that the best thing about AI is that it is using machine intelligence, but the way to get the most out of that machine intelligence is to complement it with human intelligence. And so a lot of the companies that I'm looking at, for example, are really looking into saying, we want to work with less data. There's a whole area of work that I think in this spatial collapse where companies are having much more honest conversations about like, well, how much data do you really need? So like, for example, Janet Eggers from Neurologics talks about how, she offers predictive analysis. She does like matchmaking and capabilities inside companies. They have some of the most advanced algorithmic work. But what she says to her clients is, we won't build you a data model until we talk to your humans. If we're like, let's say building like, matching system for like car parts. Well, we want to talk to your salespeople who are selling those car parts. We want to talk to them. And that's talking to the experts who have those domain expertise. I think that's the future, so there's two things. One is working with the least amount of data as possible. She actually says that to her customers. Like their team says, we want to work with the least amount of data as possible because then that's how we can identify what's working or not. We can always layer more data in later, but don't give us too much. Work with least. The other thing that she's doing is that they actually don't want that much customer data. They want data about the product and just a few questions about the customer because they don't want to hold all that customer data. And the third thing that I think is interesting is that she's wanting to work with experts, and that's the human model. And that's where I think companies need to totally change the way they're doing, especially if you're working with algorithms, is that they're jumping straight to the data model and they're skipping over the human model part. So for example, there are so many companies where I go in and I'm like, they're like, come in and help us analyze what's happening. I'm like, show me your data model. They're like, what? But yeah, show me your spreadsheet, wherever you captured your universal data model, and let's do data mapping. Let's look at your like what are the variables you collect? Let's look at the algorithm. Let's look how you weight each thing. And then I'm going to ask you why about each variable. And that all those variables, all those data points come from a human being, and so you have to build a data model for your product, but you have to make sure that's based on actual human behavior. So if your data model says like, we're going to capture what time people wake up, well, it better match that people do something around, like that's a meaningful data point. And you have to find out from the humans, is that a variable we should capture? So I always advise companies like start with a human model first. That's how you should build your data model to really reflect and match that human model. And I think the future is in companies who are going to be doing that.
I love it. That's it gives us hope for people that the empathy side of understanding humans and how it works and not just analyzing the data. So it's good to know there's hope for all of us who are the humans out there in the future. I can't help it though, because I was almost hoping that the pessimism is, I've got to ask this question.
Oh no.
So you're talking about great examples of where people are leveraging an AI and then you need to leverage human and things like this. What about government departments, military organizations, like people that are using data and making the wrong assumptions? Is there a possible threat to humanity, to society, to
That's a big question.
It is. It's. I've got to throw the one pessimistic question in there. But are there people that are taking data, making wrong assumptions, and could potentially kill people?
It already is happening. We've been doing that. In so much of what the US was doing in the Middle East was, for example, using quantitative data points, thinking they could track people's cell phone usage and they would send missiles and kill those people. However, if you talk to any anthropologist, I've been researching cell phone use for a while. I know that people switch SIM cards in a family. If you can't afford to have everyone has a phone, people switch SIM cards or people share cell phones also. And so you've had so many stories of missiles killing the wrong people, not even and maybe the original person shouldn't have been killed. But the point is that that's an example where the data model made an assumption of like, oh, if we just have cell phone coordinates about the cell phone, because, that's what we've been tracking. But the human models, like the human behavior around cell phone usage and chip sharing, SIM card sharing and actual cell phone sharing doesn't match your assumptions in your data model. You just killed the wrong person. This happens all the time, all the time. And it's happening right now with facial recognition, is that we have evidence that machine learning facial recognition doesn't perform as well on non-white faces. Yeah. And here we have all these police, at least in the US, right? I'm going to speak to our context. I've only researched this here, but police departments are, for meaningful, good reasons, they're saying we want to be more efficient and, identifying a bad actor. Get that? Cool, great. I want that too. But in reality, these softwares are misidentifying, wrongfully accusing, mismatching crimes to Black men and to the wrong Black men. And so we have all these cases in the US where Black men have been wrongfully arrested for murder, for robberies. You have because of facial recognition or because of geolocation data that wasn't attributed correctly. So all of the stuff it's all stuff we haven't worked out in the analog life, because that's because a lot of these systems are embedded with racism. You may not ask about race, but if you have racial profiling that's embedded into zip code data, you don't have to ask about race. This zip code, if you live in this zip code and there happen to be more racial profiling, you're going to be more highly targeted. So the point is that all these things it's not created by AI. These were problems we had in our offline physical lives, but now they're just augmented because we never fixed it in our physical spaces, right? It's just now in our spatial collapse, we're all living in 2D space more often, and all of these things are negotiated over the time. So that's why I always say these issues are not just over privacy. If only these data issues were about violations of privacy, which is about control of data or leakage of data, it'd be so easy to resolve. What's really at stake with AI, with all of these problems, is that our personhood is at risk. Our livelihood is at risk. Our ability to be a person is at risk if the machine misreads you, because we have made the world more legible. The world is a database, but just because you've made the world a database, it doesn't mean it makes the world better. And we have to develop new mechanisms and new tools to make the world safe, to counterbalance all the problems that come from making the world more legible. And that's why I think we have to talk about these things are not just violations of privacy, they are violations of personhood, because they can put your life at risk. If you get wrongfully arrested, your ability to get a job after that, is affected.
Yep. What are we going to do about it? If it's already happening, I mean, you've touched on a point that's really passionate, and these people shouldn't be making assumptions and to your point, you said this facial recognition isn't a bad thing. It's just not ready. And it's not tested out on the main public, and people then shouldn't be using the data and making assumptions and wrongfully accusing people. What can be done to stop it?
I mean, I think what needs to happen is we need to have a plurality of voices and well-researched work. I think podcasts like this one are incredibly important, because you're not just saying we're only going to talk about technology and not talk about its impact on society. For so long, we told engineers and computer scientists, don't worry about application, just worry about building the code, which is like, code is life now. If everything is digital, that means we are code, we're living in it. And so I think it's like conversations like this that make it easy for people to understand, but we need to be funding research institutions. We need to have, but really, ultimately, what I think needs to happen is all this research on ethics, none of it's going to work unless we bring it inside companies and into the product. Now, I don't mean hire a chief ethicist to make yourself feel good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do not mean that. I mean, great, you can have that as a person to start the conversation in the culture. But what I mean is you need to have ethnographers, you need to have people who understand people on your teams and making changes, telling the PMs and the engineers so that change could be made in the code right away, or to reflect or flag something right away, and to make room for those kind of voices. And I think what I'm scared about is inside tech companies, especially where a lot of this power lies, is that they're firing the very people they brought in. You know, Tim Negru was fired at Google for raising the fact that their algorithms were actually hurting people. And so I think, you know, some of the best voices of our times are being co-opted by tech companies. They're hiring research scientists who are critical, and then once they're too critical, they get fired, or you just start to quiet your voice because your income depends on them.
Yeah.
Yeah, the people that are asking the question and challenging the system, they're disruptive, but they're correctly disruptive. They're disruptive for a reason. They're not doing it because they're being painful. They're doing it because they have morals and they believe, right? That's scary.
Yeah.
The ethic question back into the companies. You don't have regulation for this, really. That's the thing. Like, you have regulation for banking and
it's an unknown territory. Tricia, I've been blown away by this conversation, and I hope our audience is as well. What are you working on? What can we look forward to that you've got? And can you share it?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about what I'm working on in terms of blockchain and cryptocurrency research. Is that first of all, I'm very passionate about cryptocurrency because I think it's a form of wealth accumulation. And it's the largest forms of wealth explosion that has happened, I would say, since social media, where tech companies capture people's data. That was a wealth explosion around advertising. A bunch of people became rich. And then with industrial revolution, with slavery, all that stuff, a bunch of people also became rich. And so you have all these eras where it's like explosions of wealth. And it's always usually been very concentrated, right? It's only certain people, usually men, usually white men, who were able to benefit from it. And I think for the first time, blockchain, cryptocurrency, there's a new form of wealth explosion that isn't as concentrated and isn't as exploitive also, that there's an opportunity where it's like anyone could potentially invest in it. However, I really care about crypto literacy, which is that if half of the world is financially excluded, that means we can't onboard people onto crypto, and they're missing out. And so I'm really excited about blockchain design, about how do you make blockchain more accessible, cryptocurrency more accessible. And I'm also really excited about DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations that are being run by algorithms. You know, there's a lot of discussion about like the algorithmic CEO, where literally the DAO is a public ledger where you can automate contracts and smart chains and all the stuff that's like either on chain or off chain. Like, it's getting really complex. All these new technologies are being developed to enable the stuff. But the whole world is changing. And I think part of that has to do with spatial collapse, is that one of the things that happens with spatial collapse is you start to question current institutions. And I think we see all this money printing and inability for the government to actually respond to people's needs. I think people are actually questioning the strength of the US dollar, the utility of a fiat currency, and the limitations of it. And do we need a international settlement currency? And this is going to change the way enterprises work. And I think all of these questions around algorithmic decision making, decentralized, like all of the problems we have now that we just talked about, imagine an enterprise that literally is working without people, that is just automated based on algorithms that were pre-written, pre-decided, so that it can execute automatically. I mean, it fucking freaks me out. And so I'm like, we got to research this and study it.
I thought I was the doomsday one. That one there, that enterprise that's basically no humans running it, is freaking me out. You're not serious.
Yeah. We got to look into this. This is, I'm excited for what's going to come out of it. It's just so complex. It's not just about crypto. It's also about blockchain. It's about organizations. It's also about art with all the explosion of nifties. It's like every day my mind explodes, but I think this is really where we're thinking. If we want to look at the future of data and algorithms, we have to understand how blockchain is part of the stack, not just like blockchain itself, but part of a stack. But what does it actually enable? And how do these questions that we just talked about get worked out through that?
You had me.
I try to keep it concise.
You had me at like the next way to get rich is, and then I was like lost for about 20 seconds. I had to go down and get my pen to write down. Going, what do I have to do to get rich again? Was it blockchain and crypto? I'll go research that. And
what I'll tell you right now, you need to start doing DCA, dollar cost averaging, on Bitcoin. Hold in Bitcoin. Hold long.
Slow down, Tricia. Slow down. Say that again. Tricia, thank you very much for being part of this podcast. It's been absolutely enthralling.
And good luck with your move and move safely.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we'll get you down to Australia at some point, hopefully.
Please, because you all look like you're living freely and living your best lives. And I'm so jealous. I want that. Bye.
Bye.